Okay, well, welcome again to Christians in Real Life. We have, if Adam was here, I'd thank him for covering for me last week. I'm looking forward to the rest of this quarter because there's going to be, Jeremy's going to teach a class, Zach's going to teach a class or two, John McCarthy's teaching, I think Blake is going to teach one. So, and any of you guys who would like to take a shot at teaching a class, let me know. The material is done. It's just, take it. I think there's 3 openings left still. Just before we jump into this, for this class right here. Sorry, well, never mind. I'm going to close that back door. Jeremy, would you slide that thing closed a little bit, please? You don't have to close it all the way, but thank you. And for the ladies, I just want to remind you of this. The guys, we did ours last Tuesday, the previous Tuesday, whatever that, not this past week, the week before. And ladies, you're coming up this Tuesday night. Kara's going to be teaching just a short, very informal kind of a discussion devotional, have dessert. Guys, we had, I think there were seven of us. It was a good, just sit down discussion. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't like a class by any means. I think that's what Kara's plan is for hers. But ladies, yours is Tuesday night in here. For those that aren't here, remind them that this is happening. And one other thing I wanted to remind you all, and I'll remind again before if more people show up, we are always needing camp counselors for teen camp. If any of you all would like to do that, please let me know. And again, I'll probably reiterate this too if we get more people here at the end of class. But we're always, what's the word I want to say? We're always trying to get mature counselors. I'm on the camp board. I'm one of the co-directors of teen camp. So that's what I mean when I say we're always, we have that enthusiasm of those kids that graduate high school and the next year they want to come back and be counselors, which is great. I love that. But those aren't always the ideal counselors. They're great to plug in with somebody. As you know, Jeremy, Brad, you guys will probably attest. Any of y'all who have been involved with camp counseling, Holly, it's good to have some people with some experience to not be extended camper as a counselor. That's the best way I can think of to say that. So if any of you guys would like to know more about how that works, if you could do 3 days out of the week, that'd be great. We can work things out. Just let me know. We'll see what we can work out. In last week's lesson, as Adam was talking about the some of these different ways we have to balance work in our Christian life and how they blend. I was thinking this morning, I don't know if balance is the right way to even say that. It's more like how we blend those two because that's what we do. That's who we are. He was talking about the quote that he thought was from Where the Red Fern Grows, and he said that was one of the 2 movies that ever made him cry. It's one of those, I talk about it. It gets me emotional. The expression, work like it all depends on you and pray like it all depends on God, that he thought was from Where the Red Fern Grows, but still a good connection. And he was talking about all the different aspects of these different Bible characters, what their work was, what their role was, and how through all of that there's this overlying principle that what we want to do is represent Jesus well. In fact, the expression, one of the phrases he used, that he doesn't want to, he used the expression, I don't want to give my faith a black eye while I'm doing my work. In my relations with the people that I work with, I want to reflect Christ well. I want to encourage people well. And he talked quite a bit about the idea of, is that going to intimidate a coworker, especially if it's somebody under you, about sharing your faith and the complexities of that. And again, that's whatever your work is. I mean, if whatever it is that you do that spends your time is your work, we have to figure out how we do that, engaging with other people the right way, whatever our work is. And he talked about the idea of citizenship versus nationality, which I thought was a really great illustration, that we're earth nationals. This is where we are, this is where we live, this is where we belong temporarily. Ultimately, our citizenship is in heaven, so we need to live and to work at the things we do in a way that reflects that. And he was talking about the idea of living and working in a foreign country, that you don't get the nuances of their culture. You don't understand, you don't relate. You want to do your best. You want to work as hard as you can. You want to represent yourself and your faith and everything else well, but you're not one of them. And I thought that was a really good point too. That so relates to how we are, or how we should be as Christians. That this is where we are, but this is not where we belong. And our work life is going to reflect that. I talked about Abraham and Joseph and the different ways that their work that their work impacted the expression of their faith. And he used the expression that we need to be working based on our faith, that our character directs our actions. And that, whether we're talking about the workplace that is your job that you go to for your 9-to-5 thing, or that's you're working at home with your kids, you're working in a volunteer situation, that really says about everything, that we need to be working based on who we are, working at whatever we do based on the fact that we're reflecting God, that God will take our talents. He talked about those who helped build the temple. They had all these different gifts, all these different skills and abilities that God put to use that weren't necessarily religious skills, but they still had an impact that built this house of praise for God. And I think that's an important thing to remember in whatever our work is. So today what I want us to talk about, these first 3 lessons all kind of go together. I think Zach is next week, and he's going to kind of turn a little bit different direction. But these first 3 lessons are kind of just establishing this idea that whatever our work is, however we think of that, whether it's you're the CEO of a huge company, or you're a mid-level manager, you're a volunteer worker at a daycare, whatever it may be, that's your work. And that in that we have to remember that isn't necessarily our focus. It's part of who we are, it's part of what we do. We have to figure out the best ways to relate. And like I said, as we move forward from this week on, we're going to start getting into some more details about how we relate exactly and in some more specific ways. Let's stop for a minute and have a prayer. Have any prayer requests? Good news while we were gone, James and Haley having Wyatt. That's really cool.
So Kayla and I are moving back to Colorado at the end of this month.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Back to Denver area?
Yeah.
Well, is that good, or good for you all, bad for us, huh?
I guess.
Well, good. I'm glad that's working out. I know that was kind of the original plan. Zach and Kayla moving back to Denver at the end of this month. Yes, ma'am.
A family friend of ours, it was actually in the prayer request recently, but for the Rose rule, she's got cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And then also another family friend of ours, I'm drawing a blank on his last name. His name's Steve. Sorry.
God knows.
He's also been told he has cancer too.
What was the first name?
Steve?
No, the first person.
Oh, Rose.
Rose. Okay. Okay. The Brown's friends, Rose and Steve, both diagnosed with cancer. That's rough.
I have surgery Wednesday.
Michaela's surgery Wednesday. Okay. Anything else? Okay, let's pray together. God, our Father, we thank you so much for today. We thank you for this opportunity to be here together as a family, to spend time in worship together, spend time in study together. We thank you so much that you have provided the church for us, provided this avenue of fellowship and of communion with each other and with you. Thank you for each of these who are here this morning, for their willingness to be here, their desire to be here. I pray that you will bless our time together this morning. God, we have some specific things we'd like to lay at your feet this morning. We know that you know these things, but we appreciate that you have asked us to bring them to you. God, I pray that you will watch over Zach and Kayla as they move back to Denver. We hate to see them go. We hate to lose them, but God, we know that that was part of their plan originally, and just pray that you'll bless their move there, that things will go well as they move, that they'll get settled in and get plugged back into their church family there. Also want to pray for the Browns' friends, for Rose and for Steve, for their recent diagnosis with cancer. God, I pray that you will comfort them, help Trevor and Katie to be an influence and a support to them in whatever way they can. Help those families to feel their comfort, to feel your comfort, and to feel peace as they struggle with this difficult situation. For Michaela, God, we pray that you will watch over her as she goes into surgery Wednesday. Pray that will go well, that her situation will be resolved, and that she'll be back on her feet soon. Pray that you'll watch over her and Brad and Cooper as well. Just pray that you'll help Brad to be a support and a comfort to her in whatever way he can. God, again, I pray that you will continue to bless us. Thank you for this group. I pray that you will continue to bless us as we meet more and more together, that we will reconnect as a group, that we will continue to bring people back into our young adults group and back into this congregation as we get more and more vaccinated and open back up. God, I pray that you'll keep us healthy, keep us safe, watch over us in everything that we do. God, I pray that you'll help us to always be the people you would have us to be, whether it's at home or at work or wherever we might be. Again, I pray that you'll bless our time together this morning. Watch over us in all that we do. I pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. One of the things that... Oh, hey. As we... Come on now. Can't work the clicker. As we think about work in whatever aspect it may be, we all deal with someone else's authority, or we deal with being the authority. And that, again, whatever your work is, that's more or less true. Ouch. Most of us have probably had that terrible boss that is the authority but has no authority from your perspective. Anybody have a terrible boss story? Mine always goes back to when I was in college at OSU. I worked at this farm and home supply store. And I was not the farm and home supply person. But my dad was a purchaser for a big company in Stillwater, and he bought a lot of stuff from them. And I went in on my application, they saw the name Davison, and the lady goes, "Is Lyle your dad?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she was like, "I was hired," and I knew that was going to happen. But I was a long-haired kid with earring, and I was not the farm store guy, but they hired me anyway. And so the boss the couple that owned it, the lady owned the store. Her husband, second husband, he kind of owned it too, I guess. He was, they've both passed away, so that's bad, but he was just a bad person. I had my buddies come out to the store every now and then, because I was like, you've got to just see this guy. He's like a cartoon character. You've got to just witness this person happen. And he was just the worst. I can't even begin to tell you stories, but it was just an unpleasant person. Didn't know what he was doing half the time. We sold farm equipment, so we were putting like rake teeth together and plowshares for people and stuff. So you had to know what you were doing. And Mike knew more than I did. I know that, but But a lot of times he was just talking. He'd tell, yeah, you got to get 4 of those and 6 of those. And we'd be standing there going, he hasn't looked in the book. He doesn't know if that's right. And we were always returning stuff. But I mean, there's so many character stories about him. But he was just he was a hard person to deal with. And he was also one of those people who was this person. Authority, he loved it. And you could tell. I mean, he would let people know that he was the boss. And it was just... Oh, it was so hard to deal with. But it was in another way, because of my personality, it was also kind of funny the entire time I worked there. But anybody else, you have a terrible boss story you want to share, or a situation that happened with a boss? Anybody? I know you all have. You're all like, wait a minute, can I do this? I'm the boss.
Yeah, he's like, well, that's not really good. And then later he'd be like, oh, you know what we should do? And it was my idea. And it was like...
Yeah.
And he was the assistant manager, actually, but, he was still a manager. And then he would also do things like, he would get upset when people would bring their dogs in. And it's like, but of course, yeah, I know. Bring their dogs in. But the thing was, he'd get upset was because his dogs, he'd bring in his little Pomeranian or whatever, and let them run around off leash, and so they would just go visit other dogs, and then some dogs were aggressive, and he'd get mad at the owner. It's like, you're not supposed to bring these pets to work. Like,
So it's the manager that ignores your ideas and then claims them later.
yeah, and then do as they say, not as they do type thing.
Yeah.
And it was just, I mean, I might have helped with getting him let go, but
Well,
but that was because I brought it to corporate attention. I talked to them like, it's changed, and has already, yeah, it was a very hard work environment. But I mean, I talked to corporate multiple times because I didn't appreciate how he treated me, because he treated me like I was just this dumb girl that didn't know anything. And and then again, there's just things he was doing that I was like, that's not okay. Like, that's against corporate policy and all these other things. So
well, and right at first you said, I can't remember everything that went on there. I think God blesses us like that just kind of wipes our memories a little bit. Jeremy, what's yours?
No, just, I mean, this guy I worked for in a car dealership, he was just another really terrible boss, and just, liked to kind of puff his chest up, and let people know, like you said, that he was the boss.
Yeah.
But he really wasn't. He wasn't the owner of the dealership. He had no authority. He had no say. He ran the marketing department. That was it. But he would do some shady stuff and try to get us to do some shady stuff, and ended up having to, basically, like, in fear of losing my job, even had to say no, not doing what you're asking me to do.
Yeah.
It was just a crazy situation.
Well, and there's the boss that ignores and then claims. There's the boss that just flexes the authority. At the farm store, there was a guy that worked there also, this guy named Butch, that had worked in the tack department, the horse stuff department, for years, for the lady's first husband, who owned, that was, everybody called the place Steve's Farm and Home, because Steve was the lady's first husband, but they divorced and she took the store. But so Butch had worked there for years, and Butch would have a question. He'd come up to the counter where Mike and Sandy was her name, where they both were, and he'd ask a question, and Mike would turn around and answer him, but Butch would go, Sandy, what do you think we should do about that? And just totally ignore, which probably isn't the right way to do it either. But in whatever those situations are, and again, maybe your terrible boss thing was the thought you had was from high school. Maybe it was from last week. Maybe it was from a non-paying job. But when authority in whatever the situation is projects and enforces authority just based on the fact that they're authority. That's when I think we tend to struggle. Sometimes the authority in your position, in your work, is hard to define. For me, for instance, my authority, I guess, is our elders. That's who I answer to. But they know, and I know, that, ultimately my authority is God, just like God is ultimately their authority. But like when I'm here during the week, they're not here. My bosses don't come in and go, "Hey, you working on that class? Let me see it. I'll check it out. Oh, that's behind. I'd fix that." They don't do that. I don't have that sort of direct authority. If you're a stay-at-home parent, you don't have that same person that, you don't have the boss checking in theoretically on you every day. You got stuff you got to do, and you got to do it. Katie. That's something else we'll deal with. That the kids better not be the boss. The kids think they're the boss. But yeah, you have that idea of, even if it's invisible authority, there's still somebody that you're answering to. There's still somebody that is going to come and maybe not inspect, but you know that you're doing this to project. I don't know how to even word this. There's someone who wants to see that you're doing your job. Whether it's your direct supervisor who comes by your desk 12 times a day that you want to strangle because they're always looking over your shoulder, or if it's every now and then somebody just pops in and goes, "Hey, are you doing what you're supposed to be doing?" Everybody knows there's an authority. Without saying God, because that's the answer. What is, like for instance, a stay-at-home mom, a stay-at-home dad, a person who's an independent contractor? Let's use that. Say a person is an independent contractor. You're a house painter. You own the company. Who's your authority?
In a way, your clients.
Yeah, you're answering to the person that said, "I'm hiring you," because they hired you. Therefore, they become kind of de facto become your boss. They're the ones who are saying, "Here's how I want it done." Now, in that example, is that always easy? Because you don't have a supervisor, you don't have somebody who's saying, "Now do this, check this box." Is it easy? Say in this situation, you're a house painter, the client, the homeowner is your boss. Is that easier or is it more difficult?
It can be more difficult because you have to call the shots on what needs to be done too.
You as the individual, you have to call the shots, but who wants to call the shots? The customer. The customer is always
somewhat right.
No. That's the motto. The customer is always right. That's hard to deal with. I also worked, when I was younger, I worked for a landscaper doing French drains and that kind of stuff. And I would stand there. I was the peon, so I just kind of stood there and listened. But I would listen to homeowners say, "We want this done here and this done here and this done here." And we'd do it. And they'd come back at the end of the week and go, "That is not what I wanted." And I'd be like, "That's exactly what you told us to do." No, I wanted all that down there. And you're just like, and my boss then, he was such a laid back guy. He'd just go, "Okay." And I was like, "Oh, he says okay, but I have to do all this." But so like again, think of a stay-at-home mom, a stay-at-home dad. The authority then is the other spouse. Hopefully not in a negative way. We'll talk about that maybe too. But whatever gets done during the day, the other spouse is going to come home and either affirm, hopefully, or say, "Wow, it looks like a train wreck here." Again, hopefully that doesn't happen. But there is that somebody I answer to, right? And that goes with any position. If you're a volunteer fireman, you work your regular job and you go work with the fire crew on the weekend, you're still answering to somebody. You can walk away any moment. But because you're there, you're volunteering to be under this person's authority. Turn over to Ephesians chapter 6. We're going to look at this section for just a few minutes. This is This is one of those passages, we're going to look at this one, and then it's kind of companion passage in Colossians. But this is one of those passages that you've probably heard this talked about and taught and preached in a million different ways. But this is, come on. Hello. I need to get the other clicker so I know what I'm doing here. This is a passage that Paul's writing about the idea of slaves and masters. And again, you've probably heard this over and over. In that culture, slaves were more, there were different tiers of slaves. There were some slaves who were slaves in the most negative, stereotypical sense. But a great number of the slaves, bondservants, servants, were more or less employees. They worked for people. Slaves were purchased, but like I said, for probably 80% of the slaves in the Roman world, their purchasing was basically a hiring. Most of them couldn't leave their employment, and that's really where the slave connotation comes in. But for the most part, it wasn't slavery in that the negative sense that we think of it. So we can make the connection with this passage to employment and authority, or even volunteering your service and authority. Look at what this says. And like I said, this is something that we can all certainly apply. Verse 5, slaves, obey your human masters with fear and trembling in the sincerity of your heart as you would Christ. This is Christian Standard Version, the Christian Standard Bible, that's what I'm reading. But I want you to see what's in yours too, because some of the wording will be a little bit different. In the sincerity of your heart as you would Christ. Don't work only while being watched as people pleasers, but as slaves of Christ. Do God's will from your heart. Serve with a good attitude as to the Lord and not to people, knowing that whatever good each one does, slave or free, he will receive this back from the Lord. And masters, treat your slaves the same way, without threatening them, because you know that both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. Okay. When we think about answering to or conforming to the will of that terrible boss, what are we supposed to, according to this passage, what are we supposed to show toward those in authority? Respect. And that is hard in those terrible boss cases. I've had some employers that had my respect just because of who they were. The guy I worked for in Oklahoma for years, a guy named G.A. Lewis, he was huge for one thing, so he had my respect because of fear and trembling. But he was a good guy. He was a good man. He was a Renaissance man. He played football at OU, and I forgave him for that. But he went on and played for the Green Bay Packers. He made the starting lineup for the Green Bay Packers. And the week before the first game of the season, he blew his knee out and never played it down. And never talked about it negatively, ever. His son, my very good friend, his son, told some stories about his dad kind of complaining once in a while. But to anybody else, you never know. You never know he played football, except for the fact that he was enormous. But he was just a good guy that earned my respect just because of his character. Our elders, I show our elders respect. Number one, because they're elders, but number two, because it's easy to. I've worked with elderships that it wasn't as easy to, but when you work in a situation, again, let's say you're volunteering at a daycare where your child is, that if there's somebody there that you're working with that's in charge, that is pleasant and has good character, it's easy to say, you tell me what to do, I'll do it. That's the idea that we're supposed to have with authority. With fear and trembling, what do other translations say besides fear and trembling? Any other words? How about the next phrase? Obey your human masters with fear and trembling in...
I got the NIV,
Uh-huh.
where it says fear and trembling in yours, it says respect and fear in mine.
With respect and fear, then what's the next phrase? With respect and fear...
Sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ.
Sincerity. Does everybody basically say sincerity? What is that? How does that apply to authority? Be genuine. What'd you say?
Treat them like they're still a person.
She's coming from the bad boss perspective. Treat them like they're still a person, even though they're this disgusting. No. When you show respect to authority with sincerity, what's the opposite of that?
Imply respect?
What'd you say?
You're implying.
Implying respect? Oh, come on.
Go with the opposite of sincerity, just being two-faced. Like, so.
Being this guy. The boss is always hilarious. And you know,
Brown noser?
yeah,
Term that I've heard.
Dwight. You know, I mean, you have to go there, I guess. But I mean, it's everything the boss does is great. Everything the boss says is funny. Back to my farm and home supply store. There was a young guy my age, or he's a little bit older than me, I guess. But he was like that and it grossed me out because the guy talked really bad about Mike. But whenever he was around him, they were pals. I mean, they joked, and Mike was crude and Glenn would just, he would just, knowing what I did, it was just gross to me because I knew Glenn was just being the suck up, you know. But what's wrong with this? I mean, what's wrong with being that insincere, the person who shows respect with insincerity? What's wrong with that? Isn't it dishonest? Yeah. I mean, when it comes right down to it, it's dishonest. It's implying, like Trevor said, it's implying that you really respect this person, but really in your heart, and that's really what matters, is you may not be showing this fear and trembling, or that respect. Faking it, and again, whatever your work situation is, faking it is just being dishonest and insincere. When we think about that, look then down. Okay, where it is. Serve. Verse 7. What is read your verse 7?
Serve wholeheartedly.
Wholeheartedly. Anybody else have another expression there? Serve in another way, verse 7.
With goodwill, render service.
With goodwill, wholeheartedly, with a good attitude. What does it mean to serve authority with goodwill? And how hard is that? I mean, is that different than showing respect?
Maybe it's meaning not doing as you're told because that person is your boss, but doing it because you know, like you have a sense of responsibility and you're glad to do it.
Right.
Because of that sense of responsibility, not because you're worried about losing a job.
Yeah. What he's saying, it goes beyond just, I'm doing it because I was told to do it. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. And like Jeremy said, sometimes you're told to do things that aren't the right thing to do, and then you have to stop. Mm-hmm. But even when it's something you don't agree with, it's something you think is dumb, if your boss tells you to unload a truck before the forklift works, which makes no sense, but he demands you do it anyway, flashbacks, you do it because you're like, okay, whatever, that's my job, and I'm going to do it with a good attitude. Now, the idea of good attitude and sincerity, in my opinion, really go together. Because, and again, this is, if you're a child at home, I mean, maybe the greatest application. Wow. How many times did you as a child, or have you seen as a parent, hey, you need to clean up your room. Hey, you need to clean the bathroom. You need to take the trash out. Okay. Does that work in any of this? No, that's exactly what, and for those of you who are parents and see that, and for those of you who were ever kids that did that, which is I'm sure nobody, that's easy for us to see. Because we as adults and parents, that for some reason is easier for us to comprehend. That wasn't supposed to be next. But... Oh yeah, let me go back to this real quick, and then we'll. Whoa, hey, come on. Don't work only while being watched. Other translations, I think, say doing eye service, but as slaves of Christ, do God's will from your heart. Down to verse 8, knowing that whatever good each one does, slave or free, whether you're volunteering or this is your job, maybe, let's look at it that way, you'll receive this back from the Lord. When we think of all of this, we think of the motivations for how we're supposed to be at work. Okay, let me go on to this first. Think about this verse, 2 Corinthians 10, verse 5. Take every thought captive to make it obedient to Christ. Think about that in your work environment. Your authority comes to you and says, we need to get this done. You know that whatever that fill in the blank they said to do doesn't really need to be done yet. There's this and this we need to get done that are more important. But they say, let's do this. What are your thoughts? You're an idiot. You have no idea what you're doing. You just walked into my project. I've been on this for 6 weeks. You just walked in and told me because you think it's cool or you think it's whatever, you think we need to do this. I know we need to do this. Take every thought captive and you lay it at Jesus' feet and go, is this something I should think? And Jesus says, well, you already thought it, but it's certainly not something you should say. So the idea of responding to authority is fundamental, really, to who we are as Christians. This is the companion verse, is the way I think of it. In Colossians 3, same idea. Obey your masters and everything, not only while being watched. Work wholeheartedly. There's that expression again, fearing the Lord. Whatever you do, do it from the heart. Knowing that you will receive the reward of an inheritance from the Lord. You serve the Lord Christ. Now, look down here. Chapter 4, verse 1. Masters, deal with your slaves justly and fairly, since you know that you too have a master in heaven. So let's talk about, just for a minute, the other perspective. You're the authority. I know a lot of you have jobs where you have people under you. This certainly will apply to the stay-at-home parent. You have kids under you. Often, I mean, really when you think of the whether it's a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad, whichever parent is at home during the day managing the household, opinion here, the other parent is kind of going to need to defer to that parent's, or the one that's at home managing things. You're going to have to kind of defer to what they say. Yeah, you have some input and all that, I get it. But when you think about how you deal with those under you, again, maybe we're thinking specifically children in this case, you have to remember that you have a boss over you that sees what you're doing, that knows what you're doing. That's why I think when we think of these two concepts, these two passages, the stay-at-home mom or the stay-at-home dad or the person that's the independent business person needs to remember that you may have people under you and you may think nobody's over me because I'm the boss here. Well, you're not. I mean, God knows what you're doing, and God expects you to represent Him and to represent yourself well. Okay, so we're out of time there. I got to get back in the concept of class being short. You think of authority of teachers. Teachers are in charge of that classroom, but those under them are their students. There's somebody over them, whether they know it or whether there's the principal or whoever is there. There's still that respect that you have to show to those under you. In the Colossians passage, it says, masters are commanded to stop treating people unfairly. as an authority, if you are the authority, you've got to make sure that you're just. You got to make sure that you're fair with people. That doesn't mean the people below you or the people that are under your authority are always right. That doesn't mean they're always smart even. But you have to treat them the right way. As non-citizens, we have to remember that we have an ultimate authority. And that's really what it comes down to. That God is over us, God's really in charge, and He knows what we're doing. So whether we're the one under authority, we respond correctly, or if we're the one with the authority, we handle it properly. Now, like I said, next week we're going to move into some more specifics. Thank you. Sorry for having to squeeze it all in there at the end. Any other thoughts? All right, we'll pick up there next week.